no longer open, but it looks like this huge Victorian type castle, the classic image of the madhouse. And they did call it, because it was built in the 1800s, they did call it at one time the Great Insane Asylum. So she checked herself in there, and that was in July of 1969. I know that for a fact because I found a letter that was written to them saying, "We have your daughter, Sacheen Cruz." She started to make that metamorphosis around that time. We had
interesting. That's how she had. Okay, so she had picked the first name by 1969, but not the last name, as part of sort of figuring out which identity. It's fascinating too, because like you talked about, it's, a really good point about, there were so many people trying to figure out who they were in that era, what they stood for, what they wanted to fight for, fight against. And there was probably for the first time, an availability in society to say, yeah, you can reinvent yourself. You can figure out what you want. There's more news going around. There's movements. So that was something that was common to all people, especially young people back then. But then when you combine that with somebody who already has pre-existing pretty severe mental issues, then you can get somebody who invents a character, as you kind of say, that isn't based on reality and is just now like, okay, here's my background, which again, also kind of like, maybe that's okay if you're kind of like, oh, people go to college and they say, my name is this now or whatever, it's like, there are harmless versions of that, I suppose. But it sounds like, for her, this was a conscious shift to go like, all right, I'm reinventing myself. I'm going to come with a backstory. I have some, I have already ongoing mental issues. So therefore it's going to be, looking from now, it was going to be hard for her to extract herself from that kind of thinking.
Correct. Buffy St. Marie did the same thing. What worked for both of them is that along with this change in society came the American Indian movement. And in the Bay Area at that time, they had taken control of Alcatraz. The woman who really should be the icon on that is Lynetta Warjack, who took role the entire time and was there. So that occupation took effect in November of 1969. Then it went on for 19 months. So what's really interesting is that throughout the 50 years when my sister has lived on her 15 minutes of fame, on Brando's coattails, none of these journalists do any research. If she talks about her whole entire career or life being this Sacheen Littlefeather person and you can see in her interview she does. I was in a mental hospital for a year, and she makes it so dramatic. Put the timeline together. If you check in July of 1969 and you're there for a year and you come out, guess what? Alcatraz is pretty much wrapped up. And she tried to make a claim.
The point being, she wasn't there. Really like a part of that. Yeah.
She was never there. She was on Thorazine. They did that with people who had mental problems. Right. They didn't really know what to do with them. They just overdrive. Thorazine is an extremely strong narcotic. So when we went to see her, she was pretty much catatonic and her mouth was drying, and it was just a terrible situation. So prior to her going through this huge, probably the worst psychotic episode, we went on a family vacation, all the Indian reservations, and we found it very tragic how they lived and a little bit of their history and all that. I kind of think that planted a seed in her head about victimhood. So now you go to Agnew Mental Hospital and you get to metamorphosize this image, and then you come out and you've got this huge society revolution going on. And now you've got the American Indian movement taking place, and they're saying, we want our voice heard too. Okay, I get that. Real easy for her and Buffy to fall into that because they can play the part of Indian. Buffy pulled it off too for 60 years. Nobody ever checked these people for their lies. So shame on the media for their fake news.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. What pops in my head is like, back up nowadays, obviously everyone is trying to poke holes in everybody else's stories, right? So it's a lot harder to do that now. Back then, I just feel like, unless people were doing this all over the place and it just never got found out, it feels like, not to say the media was, didn't do their job, or maybe no one had reason to suspect that people might do this kind of thing. It just seems until people start doing it and you find out like, oh, people are just making up their backstory, if you're a media person and you see her on TV doing the Oscars, and then, it may never even occur to you like, oh, I should go back and literally fact check the most basic biography. Of course, nowadays everybody would. And so because of that, she clearly was able to just, no questions asked, change this whole persona that had no basis in fact.
Correct. And everybody who was, speaking out on different issues, no one checked them because it was a time and a period where voices needed to be heard. So if somebody spoke up for a cause or a group of people, they didn't check their background. That's just the way it was. That's how her and Buffy got away with it. Buffy, I can say, does have talent. However, she got paid more by finding out that if you can play Cree or Indian, you get paid more money. My sister, on the other hand, Marlon Brando, he was active in the Black Panthers, and then he was very active with Wounded Knee and some of the key players who were Dennis Banks and Russell Means. So when this all happened, because he's dealing with real tribal citizens. These people have tribal cards or they're strong descendants of people. There is no way that he would have sent her up there if he knew she was not Native American. No way. Because he was dealing with some very strong people who were in the thrones of some heavy situations. And, there was a really violent situation that took place at Wounded Knee at that time, which is part of the little speech. But he would have never done that. She duped him. And when he figured that out, then he just cut off all communication. So, this whole big thing of I was blacklisted because I did that and it ruined my career. Well, no, that never happened. What happened was, as she predicted or wanted, her film career picked up. So now you've got her, and if anyone was smart enough, they would really watch her movies because she's a Native American woman who's getting gang raped by cowboys. One of them, I don't remember, it was Billy Jack. I saw it. It was so disgusting where she's getting her clothes ripped off. It was so violent that I couldn't deal with it. I think they have it on porn sites today, for people who like that kind of thing. But I know my grandparents went to the show. She's saying, well, I'm in this movie, see it. And when one of these rape scenes came up, they just got up and left. And I don't blame them. It was disgusting. In fact, some of my friends, after this whole thing came to head, they looked it up and we said, wow, we saw those movies. They said pretty bad. So now you've got an activist who's really an opportunist, because a true Native American woman would never disgrace herself or her tribe by doing something terrible like that, because they, out here in Montana,
I was trying to figure out where the role was going. Yeah. Cause for some reason, an actor, a role is a role and you play lots, you might play a terrible person, but that's a really fascinating thing that there's like a pride thing. Yeah. But for real Native Americans, you're saying wouldn't take those kinds of roles.
Wouldn't. They don't want to be seen as sex symbols because they've been violated. Today out here in Montana, which I became aware of, and by, talking with Jacqueline Keeler and all these other people that have kind of taken me under their wing, we have a huge problem with murdered, missing indigenous women. It is a very big problem where these gals go missing, they're trafficking, they just disappear. And even at that time, that is something that Native American, they don't want to be seen as sex objects. And it has a lot to do with their history, the government moving them, killing them, raping them, all that type of stuff. And then she turns around and poses for Playboy. And a lot of people who were tribal citizens, especially the women. That was a big red flag for them, even back then. So, but see, now you've got Brando. Brando is the foundation for this all. He's a strange man, but he's a great actor. I believe he had the right motive. I don't think it should have been taken to an award show. I think he could have found another way to do that, because award shows now are nothing but political statements. I truly believe in the depths of my soul, because of that act that they did has ruined it to the extent that it is now. I feel that that was a catalyst.
Yeah.
That whole thing, that whole message that Brando wanted to get across, what was good. But then you have somebody who's Brando saying, I don't like the way Hollywood's portraying and stereotyping Native Americans, and white people shouldn't play Native Americans, but Native Americans should play themselves. Well, she comes up in a plains buckskin dress. Every tribe has a different set. Says, oh, I'm Apache, which is a lie, but she's actually an actress acting to the actors at the Oscars to break into Hollywood. Sums it up. And nothing's changed. So when I come along, or our family did after she died, because nobody would listen to us except I found Jacqueline Keeler, all of a sudden it hits the head and people started listening and going, what? They said, yeah, we're not Native here. So then that's when the Academy comes in. And that's when I saw your video said Littlefeather duped Hollywood. Well, the Academy, who knows how much money they put out on this, what I call flop apology. All of a sudden they find this out after she dies. And now the Native Americans are going, okay, this is your chance to make things right. What are you going to do? Right. And then you've got Heather Ray, Bird Running Water, who are on this alliance team. And the Academy, part of that's Jacqueline Stewart, total idiot, who was the president of the museum at that time. They came back with, we recognize self-identify. So if you want to identify as Cree, Native, Navajo, hey, we're going to go for it. That's everything that Brando said. Hollywood, you shouldn't do that. So really, nothing changed.